In The Lord of the Rings, Frodo wishes that Bilbo had killed Gollum. Gandalf responded, "Do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. My heart tells me that Gollum still has some part to play in it, for good or evil, before this is over." What does that have to do with sea otters? How could I possibly compare one of the world's most adorable animals? The very ones who fall asleep holding hands so they don't drift apart from each other, with Tolkien's portrayal of a Reddit incel. Well, the sea otter also has a tragic history leading to being seen as a modern villain. Perhaps we can learn from Gandalf here. The southern sea otter's range used to go from Oregon all the way down to Baja California. In Oregon, where sea otters no longer live, their range overlapped with the northern sea otter, whose range extends all the way past Russia to Japan. Similar to the tragic and now somewhat less tragic tale of the beaver, sea otters were almost completely eliminated by the fur trade. In the early 1700s, it was estimated there were about 300,000 worldwide. Those aren't huge numbers from a wildlife standpoint. For context, it's estimated that there was once 300 to 400 million beavers in North America. Even today, with beavers recovering, we have probably 4 million of those waddling, chonky boys. Otters just don't explode in population like that. They don't have a lot of young, and by 1911, their population was reduced by 99%, down to about 2,000. I have a video tagged here in the caption about shifting baseline syndrome. In that post, I said, the pioneers of early ecology were studying a post-beaver world. They were advocating for an already incredibly impacted environment. Similarly, sea otters are considered an enemy of the commercial fishing industry. They eat red urchins, and red urchins are good for sushi. But the industry is working in a post-otter world, and there are lots of big problems with a post-otter coastline. The story of a predator being eliminated from an ecosystem, resistance to its reintroduction is not a new one. Neither is the tale of the almost immediate benefits of reintroductions of that predator. Let's get into it. This is a picture of the Elkhorn Slough in Monterey Bay, California, and it holds a special place in my heart. I visited the Monterey Bay Aquarium on my honeymoon. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it changed my life. I went on that trip as an aspiring creative nonfiction writer with just 1 year left before graduation. And the change wasn't because I learned of all the horrible things humans were doing to the environment. I knew that message already. The part that shifted my whole worldview was seeing what people were doing about it. Until then, I'd been spending the latter part of my college career writing about environmental collapse as a foregone conclusion. I was poetically documenting decline, real Trent Reznor doomer stuff. But what was this feeling? Was it hope? Ooh, that was good. I needed more of that. I came home, changed my major to ecology, and hopefully now am doing my little part. One of the hopeful things I learned about, which was brand new at the time, was their surrogate otter reintroduction experiment. Researchers were finding out that when they took orphaned otter pups and put them somewhere they could thrive, instead, these pups would try to go home where they were in danger to begin with. This drive to go back home, even when home is nowhere because it no longer functions as habitat, is one of the biggest difficulties of restoration biology. So the aquarium started giving the pups to adult otters they had already. Adopted pups were then released into Elkhorn Slough, and everyone crossed their fingers. Surrogate-raised otters not only performed as well in the wild as their wild-raised brethren and sistren, but they also adopted the slough as home. The slough now has a flourishing population of about 100 sea otters, the largest concentration of southern sea otters on the entire California coast. They are at carrying capacity, which opens the door to further expansion and hopefully more reintroduction. By itself, this would have been a wonderful success, but researchers also noticed a change in the erosion in the marshland. Salt marsh is a vital and dwindling ecosystem. It helps armor the coast against things like rising sea levels and stronger tides associated with climate change. And in Elkhorn Slough, it was holding out against erosion stronger than the surrounding area. It turns out that one of the factors eroding the coastline were burrowing crabs, and sea otters eat a lot of burrowing crabs. According to an ecologist, they're really good at eating crab. It's just easy pickings for them. They can actually grab about 10 of these at a time. They just eat them like popcorn, shell and all. In just 3 years, the researchers were able to document that otters were preventing erosion by 10 inches a year, allowing salt marsh recovery and creating more resilient coastline. There are still a lot of obstacles still preventing a full-range recovery of sea otters. In their absence, purple urchins, which would have been kept in check by sea otters, have overwhelmed the kelp forests that protect otters from sharks. This creates a feedback loop. As kelp forest disappears, there are fewer places for otters to hide, which means more sea urchins spread, which means less kelp forest. These kinds of feedback loops are devastating. Biologists hope that by reintroducing otters to the remaining kelp forest, they can start to restore balance to coastal ecosystems. Not bad for what is essentially a giant sea weasel. Which brings me back to the beginning. Sometimes when we wake up and turn on these apps, all we see is catastrophe. It seems like there's no hope. But every day, if you're looking in the right places, you see there are people who hope anyway. And a lot of the time, what they're doing is working. The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, Gandalf said. To which Frodo replied, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. Gandalf said, so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There are forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides that of evil. Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you were also meant to have it. And that is an encouraging thought. Behind me is the Provo River Delta Restoration Project, and until very recently this was all agriculture fields, and now it is a diverse braided section of streams creating new delta habitat at Utah Lake. And yes, in so many ways we live in a calamitous period, but it is also an era of restoration, if you know where to look.